for the writing. I'd read a lot of essays, but it was now or never. I mean, this was the time to do it. And so I was literally in a taxi cab in London, going on what I called the annual pilgrimage of all Kuwaitis from Edgware Road to Harrods. And in the cab, my sister, who's an artist, she can draw, turned to me and said, "Naif, remember you told me that after school you'd go back to writing and I'd illustrate." And I'm thinking, all these degrees now, I'm going to go back to write for kids, which I didn't think I was writing for to begin with, And I said, "Yeah, somewhat I remember, but," and I said, so I wanted her to be quiet. So I said, if I go back now, after all these degrees, it has to be something that has the potential of Pokemon. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Easy to say, right? She shut up. But because there was now a vacuum in the car, I started thinking. I said Pokemon. My next thought was there had been a fatwa issued against Pokemon. Right? It's not allowed in some countries. My next thought was, my God, what has happened to Islam? And who's making these decisions for my children? My next thought was of Allah and how disappointed He must be. My next thought was Allah had 99 attributes. And by the time I got out of the cab at Harrods, I had the very beginnings of the idea. I turned to my sister, I said, "What do you think of this?" She loved it. And I ran with it. I wrote the business plan, did the financials, wrote the world's first character guide, because everywhere else in the world it's called the Character Bible. And I went out pitching, and I ended up raising $7 million within a few months for this concept. And the way I did it was this. I pitched the investors the following. I said, if you look at the superheroes that exist in the world today, there are two groups. At least there were now. Now there's a third group. The group from North America and the group from Japan. The group from North America all based on a Judeo-Christian Greek backstory. So, like the prophets, all the superheroes are missing parents. Superman's parents die on Krypton. Batman's parents die when he's 6. Spider-Man's raised by his aunt and uncle. And all of them, like the prophets, have a message delivered from above through a messenger. The prophets get it from God through the archangel Gabriel. But Peter Parker's taking a photograph when the spider comes in from above and gives him his message through a bite. Bruce Wayne is sitting in his bedroom when the bat flies over his head. Superman not only gets his thoughts from another planet, right, or the heavens, is where he's from, but when his father sends him to earth, he sends him in a pod like Moses on the Nile. And then you hear the voice of his father speaking to earth from the heavens saying, "I have sent to you my only son." Right? That's Jesus in the Bible. You go over to Japan, you see the Pokemon or Digimon. Pokemon is one. Pokemon is a few hundred characters, each of which able to do one thing. Not everything but one thing. The Western hero, the culture of the individual. He can do one thing. So this guy can take on this guy, but needs help from this guy to take on this guy. It's more about teamwork. It's Japanese culture. So I said that Muslims believe that power is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah has 99 attributes. Those attributes, if they get together in one place, in its absolute form, deify that being. La ilaha illallah. But those attributes are human attributes. They're not the same level. Things like generosity and wisdom and foresight and mercy and dozens of others that were not used to describe Islam in the media until we came to the forefront in 2004. Okay? So the idea, very simply, was a series of heroes, each of which had one of these traits. They worked together in a team. That's all I had. I had a business plan, but that's what they bought into. And what I tell my investors now is the only person crazier than me was them. They actually gave me the money. And so the investors came from 8 different countries. $1 million came from my classmates in business school, which is why I have investors from Mexico and China and Lebanon and Jordan. I tell people, out of all my accomplishments, my biggest by far is being the only Gulf citizen to go to Beirut and actually come out with money. So and one of the questions I kept being asked for initially was, have you gotten any religious approval to do this? And that's a question I'd avoid like the plague, because I knew then as I know now that once I get approval from one sheikh, then the sheikhs that don't like him are going to say it's not good, and then you get caught up in that. And I was not going to play that game. This was too important. And so I'd avoid that question as best I can. If I get pushed, I'll give a flippant answer. I'll say, I spoke to Emo Phillips. Say, Sheikh Phillips, I haven't heard of him. So that's a good thing because he's a comedian. What do you mean? So Emo Phillips used to say that every day to the age of 10 he used to pray to God for a bicycle. And at 10 he realized that God didn't work that way. So he stole the bicycle and started praying for forgiveness. I grew up in Kuwait. I grew up in a very kind of black or white Islam kind of world. I understand. I don't agree with a lot of this stuff, but I know what it is. And so I knew what I was doing. Some people may not like, but that's the extent of what they can say. But what happened basically is when I launched, it became very distracting. There's some places that we weren't allowed in, and so people wanted to debate, which is I'm happy to do, but it was taking away from my time focusing on the company. And so When I raised money for my second round of finance, I raised an additional $16 million 3 years ago from an Islamic investment bank in Bahrain. And that put to rest 90% of the stuff I heard from people. And we were allowed into the places that didn't allow us in to begin with. And because Unicorn has a 7-member Sharia board that approved what we were doing for Islamic audiences. One of the cute stories when I raised money from Unicorn, I have 5 boys, and you can imagine, the superheroes, and I have boys, they love what their father does. And I was on the phone, Unicorn said this, Unicorn said that, I'm going to have dinner with Unicorn later. And I hang up, and Faisal's there, big brown eyes. He said, Baba? I said, what? You talk to unicorns too? Yeah. So, raise the money and, start. I didn't, I knew